Breaking news from behind the scenes at Formula One: the revolutionary era of 2026 will bring not only radical technical changes, but also a financial crisis that could destroy smaller teams due to the cost of green fuel, which will reach $200 per litre. This fact has become a real bomb for the budget planning of all teams in the paddock, especially for those who are already balancing on the edge of financial possibilities within the strict constraints of the budget ceiling. Fuel costs will be outside the budget ceiling, at least most of them, but they still have to be financed. So we have to find income, explained Haas team principal Ahasapu Ayao Komatsu, emphasizing the critical importance of trying to reduce costs in the future. His words reveal the scale of the problem that all teams will face in the new era of green racing. The most troubling was the Japanese executive's statement on the ecological fuel paradox. It's very important. We call it sustainable fuel, ecologically sustainable but financially unsustainable. F1 is at the forefront of innovative technology, so we all accept that it's a very complex technology at the beginning because we are pioneers in the world of innovation. It's very expensive at the beginning. Komatsu continued his criticism, emphasizing the absurdity of the situation from the perspective of public opinion. We accept it, but there's a limit. How can we do it in a financially sustainable way? If, for example, you go to the public and say how much it actually costs, they won't understand. They'll say, how can it be sustainable? It's not. So I think it's very good that we are now discussing together as an F1 community what we can do. The technical details of the new financial scheme turned out to be even more complicated. Currently, the cost of fuel used during the season is included in the budget ceiling that each team must submit at the end of the year. Starting in 2026, however, with the expected increase in prices, this item will be effectively excluded from the annual cost limit so as not to absorb a significant portion of it. The novelty is that for the purposes of the budget ceiling, the real cost of fuel will no longer be taken into account, but an agreed value, the so-called notional value, established in advance and calculated on the basis of the quantity used, will be used. The real costs will remain outside the annual budget and the reporting that each team must submit with its costs for the season. The idea behind this choice is twofold. On the one hand, to standardize the impact of ELO fuel on the team's budgets, avoiding that differences in prices or suppliers create imbalances, since no restrictions have been imposed on this front. On the other hand, to preserve the budget ceiling resources allocated elsewhere, avoiding them being eroded by variable and unpredictable sustainable fuel costs. However, this has a dark side. Smaller teams, already close to the budget ceiling, will still have to find the means to cover the real cost of fuel outside this annual cost limit. In practice, they will find themselves in a situation of financing two parallel cost items, an overall budget within the ceiling, and additionally real fuel costs, possibly with the involvement of new sponsors or technical partnerships. Among such teams is, for example, Haas, which, thanks to the arrival of new sponsors and technical partnerships, is now operating close to the budget ceiling. This is why Komatsu's statements take on special weight. He speaks on behalf of a team that will directly feel the financial pressure of the new realities. The issue has once again come to the center of debate in recent weeks as teams and fuel suppliers work to cope with the explosion of costs. For 2026, however, there will be no room for intervention as the technical regulations are already in place and substantial changes will not be practical with just a few months to go before the start of the new season. The teams will therefore have to live with this new cost item for at least one season, trying to absorb it in their budgets while working to make adjustments in the medium and long term, possibly as early as 2027. This is a delicate issue also because sustainable fuels will play a central role in the development of the future V8 engine that manufacturers are discussing, with a possible debut around 2030. Where does the cost increase come from? The high price of sustainable fuels is mainly due to the complexity of their production and the need for a completely green supply chain, where every stage from the acquisition of raw materials to processing meets sustainability criteria. This requires a specific composition of ingredients, which is particularly expensive and in many cases much more expensive than initially envisaged. In fact, this is why the increase in costs was expected. But for both the teams and the FIA, they have already exceeded the initial estimates, making it necessary to evaluate possible interventions in certain aspects with the aim of reducing the price per litre. Fuel companies have complete freedom to choose the type of fuel, whether synthetic or biofuel, provided that the product KT meets the specifications set by the FIA. In 2026, efficiency will take on an even more central role with weight and power as determining factors, so it is not surprising that research and development costs have increased, also pushing the final price of the fuel above estimates. This is an issue that the Federation is also fully aware of, and that Nicholas Tombazis, the FIA's director of single-seaters, had already raised with the media before the summer holidays. The hope is that costs will gradually decrease over the years. However, the FIA does not believe that synthetic fuel materials will be widely used in production cars in the short term, mainly due to the high price, which limits their availability. There are certain parameters related to the energy content, the so-called evaporation characteristics and the different fuel components, and all these aspects are quite close to those in road cars, said Tombazis. However, we don't believe that F1 fuel will be in a regular car next year. There are certainly cost issues that need to be addressed so that production costs can be reduced. We're not where we want to be in terms of production costs at the moment, but I think F1 needs to innovate, and we're taking the development of these fuels to a very advanced level. I think that gradually the costs will come down, he added, trying to calm the team's concerns about the long-term prospects. Obviously, we couldn't predict where the costs of producing these fuels would be, and we couldn't even assume that Shell's production costs would be the same as Exxon, Petronas, or others, Tombazis admitted, underlining the unpredictability of the market situation. Do you think smaller teams like Haas will be able to survive the financial crisis caused by $200 fuel, or could it lead to a reduction in the Formula One field? Is such huge spending justified for the sake of environmental cleanliness of motorsport, or should the FIA reconsider its strategy for the transition to sustainable technologies? What is more important for the future of F1, keeping all teams in the championship or accelerating the development of green technologies regardless of the cost? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for the latest news and exclusive analytics from the world of Formula One